Sampling techniques. Sampling is a selection of a few units from all the observational units in a population. Today we are going to cover population and samples, method of data collection, types of sampling, examples of sampling technique. Let's understand very important statistical terms. Population. A statistical population refers to any well-defined group and can be used who are being studied or the total number of observations of a particular type about which inference are to be made. For example, all the university students in Delhi would be a population, or all the patients of a hospital suffering from tuberculosis treated with new drug could be considered as a population. However, sample is a subset of a population that is selected for analysis. So we can select a small number of individuals from the population, study them, and use the information to draw conclusions about the whole population. For appropriate statistical studies, we need to understand the data and how they have generated. In statistical research work, primary data can be collected in two different ways. One is a census method. Next is a sampling method. Census method. In this method, the data are collected from all the individual items that are concerned with the inquiry. For example, if we want to understand the level of income of the parents of all the 500 students studying in a certain school to determine their economic status, we have to make use of all the 500 observations. However, sampling methods, we can select a subset of the same data from a large population or data sets. Let's understand. Sampling methods can be divided into two types. Random or probability sampling, non-random and non-probability sampling. In random sampling, a sample is selected in such a way that each and every element in the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample. However, in non-random sampling, the samples are drawn without following any specific procedure. Random sampling is further divided into simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, and multistage sampling. Non-random sampling is further divided into convenience sampling, purposive sampling, snowball sampling, and quota sampling. Now let's understand random sampling in more details. For example, let's say a researcher wants to investigate the prevalence of hypertension or high blood sugar in adults in India. The population in this case would be all the adults living in India. However, it would be impractical to collect data on every single adult in the country. So, the researcher might take a sample of adults to study. It means random sampling is made without deliberate discrimination or purpose. Therefore, it is also called unbiased or non-preferential sampling. Let's look into another example. The researcher might randomly select a sample of 1,000 adults from different states, age group, and socioeconomic backgrounds to participate in the study. The sample would be representative of the population, meaning that the characteristics of the sample would be similar to those of the overall population. Types of random sampling. In simple random sampling, samples are chosen at random and each member in the population has an equal chance of being selected in the sample. Stratified random sampling is done in heterogeneous population having different groups with different characteristics. The population for sampling is first divided into homogeneous groups or classes called strata. Multistage sampling is a type of sampling method that involves selecting samples from large population through a multi-step process. In this method, the population is first divided into smaller groups. Then, a sample is selected from each of this group until the final sample is achieved. Cluster sampling. This method involves dividing the population into clusters and then randomly selected some of these clusters to include in the sample. Systematic sampling. This method involves selecting a random starting point from the population and then selecting every nth individual in the population to be part of the sample. Now let's look into the various examples of sampling methods. Example of simple random sampling. A researcher wants to investigate the average fasting blood glucose level in a population of adult patients with type 2 diabetes who are receiving treatment at a hospital. Let's say the researcher has a list of 10,000 patients and wants to select a sample of 500 patients to study. The researcher uses a simple random sampling method to select the samples. They use a random number generator to select 500 random numbers between 1 and 10,000. This method ensures that each patient in the population has an equal chance of being selected. Example of stratified random sampling. To estimate average weight of a person from heterogeneous population of females and males, stratified random sampling is used. Here, male from one stratum and female from another stratum in the population. A sample is drawn from each stratum so that the variability in each stratum is adequately represented in the population, forming a strata. So, it is a type of sampling method in which the total population is divided into smaller groups or strata to complete the sampling. Example of multi-stage sampling. Suppose we want to estimate the prevalence of a certain disease in a large country, but we cannot afford to survey the entire population. Instead, we can use multi-stage sampling to select a representative sample of the population. First, we can divide the country into regions, such as states. We can then randomly select a few regions from the country. Next, within each selected region, we can randomly select a few districts. Then, within each selected district, we can randomly select a few other towns or villages. Finally, within each selected towns or villages, we can randomly select a few households. We can then survey all the members of the selected households to determine if they have the disease. Example of cluster sampling. We can use the sampling technique to understand the vaccine efficacy. In a study to assess the efficacy of a new vaccine, the population of interest may be too large to sample using a simple random sampling method. Instead, the population can be divided into geographical clusters such as cities or countries. A random sampling of clusters can be selected, and all individuals within each clusters can be included in the study. This approach can help to reduce the cost and time required for the studies. Example of systematic sampling. In the sampling method, samples drawn are evenly spaced after a random start position, say A, is chosen. This is the most practical way of sampling. From a large population, samples are selected. Let's say after every second, 4th, 6th, 8th, 10, 12, 14 and 16th item depending upon the number of samples required. Non-random, non-probability sampling or deliberate sampling. Non-random sampling refers to any sampling method where the selection of the sample is not based on a random process. Sampling may be appropriate in some research contexts such as when studying a very specific population or when resources are limited. However, non-random sampling methods can introduce biases into the study, so it is important to carefully consider the potential limitations and sources of bias when using non-random sampling. Convenience sampling. This method involves selecting individuals who are easily accessible or readily available for the study, such as people who are walking by on the street or customer in a store. For example, a scientist wants to understand the effect of newly discovered drug. Instead of collecting data randomly, he decides to collect it from his fellow researchers. Purposive sampling. This type of sampling involves purposive sampling. This type of non-random sampling involves selecting individuals who meet a specific purpose or criterion. such as selecting experts in a certain field or selecting individuals who have experienced a specific event. For example, a fish breeder wants to show that fish growing in all the ponds in a village are disease-free and healthy. He will collect samples from ponds in which fishes are healthy. This shows bias sampling. Snowball sampling. This type of non-random sampling involves selecting individuals who are known to or referred by individuals already included in the study. Snowball sampling is often used in studies of hard-to-reach or marginalized population, but it may not be representative of the larger population. For example, studying stigmatized health condition. Suppose a researcher wants to study the experience of individual living with a stigmatized health condition such as HIV or mental illness. To recruit participants, the researcher could reach out to the particular organization or support groups of individuals with the condition and ask them to distribute the study information to their networks. Quota sampling is often used in market research studies, but it may not be representative of the larger population. For example, a study to investigate the effectiveness of a new medication for treating a certain disease might use quota sampling to ensure that the sample includes a sufficient number of participants in different disease severity level. The researcher might set quotes for disease severity level, severe, moderate, mild, to obtain a representative sample. Overall, we can say that it is important to choose the appropriate sampling method based on the research question, population, and available resources. Each method has its own advantages and disadvantages, and different methods may lead to different results. I hope you could understand. Thank you for watching.